Have you ever had that one neighbor, the kind who seems to think the world revolves around them, and that rules are just suggestions meant for other people? Especially when it involved their shiny, expensive toys and your resources? Well, I certainly did. And let me tell you, it culminated in a rather shocking experience for her, and a deeply satisfying one for me. Stick around, and I'll lay out exactly how a bit of my old electrical engineering knowledge helped me put a full stop to an HOA board member who decided my electricity was her personal Tesla charging fund. Where all of you watching from today? I'm always curious to see how far these stories travel, so drop a comment down below. My name is Mark, and about a year before all this kicked off, I lost my wife, Sarah. After she passed, the big house we'd shared felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum filled with too many memories. I needed a change, a drastic one. So I sold it and bought a small 2-bedroom condo in a supposedly quiet, well-maintained complex called Willow Creek. Peace and quiet, that's all I wanted. I was a retired electrical engineer, and my days of designing complex systems were behind me, or so I thought. My hobbies were simple: reading, a bit of woodworking in the garage, and trying to master Sarah's sourdough recipe. She'd have laughed at my attempts. The Willow Creek Homeowners Association was run with an iron fist, and that fist belonged to one Carol Evans. She was the HOA president, a woman who carried herself with the kind of imperious authority usually reserved for minor royalty. Carol lived in a unit directly opposite mine, and she made her presence known from day one. She drove a brand-new, gleaming red Tesla Model S, a vehicle that seemed to be her primary source of identity and self-worth. It was always impeccably clean, parked with precision in her designated spot, and often the subject of her not-so-subtle boasts during our rare and unavoidable encounters. My unit came with a detached garage, a small, single-car affair, but it had its own power supply. This was a selling point for me, as I planned to set up a small workshop for my woodworking. I even installed a separate submeter inside my garage, a habit from my engineering days. I like to know exactly what power I was using and where. Sarah had been an early EV adopter, not a Tesla, but another brand, and through her, I learned a fair bit about charging systems, power draws, and the importance of proper electrical setups. Little did I know how useful that tangential knowledge would become. The first hint of trouble came about 3 months after I moved in. I noticed my garage electricity bill, which I paid separately from the condo's main bill, was a little higher than expected. Not by much, maybe $20 or $30, but enough for a data junkie like me to raise an eyebrow. I hadn't used my power tools much that month, just the overhead lights and occasionally charging my phone. Wing, forty, and maybe a meter reading error. /M, I made a mental note to keep an eye on it. The following month, it was higher still. Now closer to $50 more than my baseline. My internal alarms started to chime. This wasn't a blip, it was a trend. I started paying closer attention to the garage area. Each unit had its own designated outdoor electrical outlet near their garage, intended for, say, a vacuum cleaner for your car or a portable work light. They weren't designed for heavy, continuous loads. Mine was on the exterior wall of my garage, facing the communal driveway. One evening, I was coming back from a late dinner with an old colleague. As I pulled into the complex, I saw it. A thick, orange extension cord snaking its way from the vicinity of my garage outlet towards Carol Evans's parking spot. And plugged into that cord, bathed in the smug glow of its charging indicator, was her red Tesla. My jaw tightened. There was no mistaking it. She was siphoning power from my garage circuit. The sheer audacity of it. Not even asking, just taking. I parked my car and walked over, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the quiet night. The orange cord was indeed plugged into my outlet. I could feel a slow burn starting in my chest. It wasn't just about the money, though that was irritating enough. It was the principle of it. The blatant disrespect. The arrogance. This woman, this pillar of the HOA, was a common thief. I stood there for a long moment, watching the soft pulse of the light on her car's charging port. And so, this is how it is /M, I thought. My desire for a quiet life was already being eroded by the entitlement of one individual. I unplugged the cord from my outlet. The satisfying click as the connection broke was surprisingly loud. I didn't coil up nicely. I just let it drop to the pavement. Then I went inside, my mind already cataloging options. My quiet retirement was about to get a little more energetic. The next morning, I was up early. My first instinct, the one Sarah would have probably urged, was to address it directly and politely. So, I waited until I saw Carol emerging from her condo, dressed in expensive-looking athletic wear, probably heading to some exclusive gym. "Morning, Carol," I said, keeping my tone level, almost friendly. She gave me a cursory glance, the kind one gives to a piece of furniture that's slightly out of place. "Mark, isn't it?" "Yes." "Listen, Carol, about last night. I noticed your car was plugged into my garage outlet." Her expression didn't change. "No surprise? No embarrassment?" "Nothing." "Oh, that?" "Yes, my charger in my garage is acting up. I figured you wouldn't mind. It's just a bit of electricity." Just a bit of electricity / I had to consciously stop myself from scoffing. "Well, actually, Carol, I do mind. That outlet is on my private meter, and charging a Tesla draws a significant amount of power. It's not really designed for that kind of continuous load, either." She waved a dismissive hand, adorned with perfectly manicured nails. "Don't be dramatic. It's a community. We help each other out. Besides, as HOA president, I'm entitled to certain. Well, let's just say I ensure this place runs smoothly. A little bit of power is hardly a concern." My politeness was evaporating rapidly. "It's a concern to me when it's my money paying for your car, Carol. And it's not a communal outlet. It's mine. I need you to stop using it." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Are you refusing to be neighborly, Mark? That's not a good way to start off here, you know? Cooperation is key in Willow Creek." There was a veiled thread in her tone, subtle but unmistakable. "Cooperation doesn't mean theft," I stated, my voice firmer now. "Please don't use my outlet again." She finally did scoff, a small, unpleasant sound. "Fine, if you're going to be so petty." And with that, she turned and strode towards her gleaming car, leaving me standing there fuming. "Oui, Betchy." She called me petty /M. For a few days, peace reigned. My outlet remained untouched. I monitored my sub-meter readings closely. Everything seemed normal. I almost allowed myself to believe that my direct, if somewhat tense, conversation had worked. How naive I was. About a week later, I was in my garage tinkering with a birdhouse I was building for my niece. It was late afternoon. I heard a faint click from outside. My senses, already on high alert for this specific issue, picked it up immediately. I moved to the small window in my garage door and peered out. There she was, Carol Evans, bold as brass, plugging that damned orange cord back into my outlet. She didn't even look around, just plugged it in and walked back to her condo, confident and entirely unconcerned. Anger, cold and sharp, pierced through me. This wasn't just casual opportunism anymore. This was a deliberate act of defiance. She was testing me, probably assuming I wouldn't do anything further. She saw my request not as a legitimate boundary, but as a challenge to her perceived authority. My background in electrical engineering wasn't just a past career, it was a set of skills, a way of thinking. And right then, those old gears started turning in my mind. Sarah, bless her, always said I was at my best when faced with a complex problem. This was a problem, all right. A Carol-shaped problem. My first step was rigorous data collection. If she wanted to be defiant, I would be meticulous. I had my sub-meter, so I started taking readings multiple times a day, noting the times. I also installed a small, weatherproof security camera discreetly positioned to overlook my garage outlet. It was motion-activated and recorded to a local drive. I checked the HOA bylaws. Nothing against cameras on your own designated property monitoring your own utilities. I was well within my rights. The footage was damning. Every other day, like clockwork, usually in the late afternoon or after dark, Carol would emerge, plug in her Tesla, and leave it charging for hours. Sometimes overnight. The sub-meter readings correlated perfectly with the video evidence. The cost was adding up, but more importantly, the sheer unadulterated gall of it was what fueled my resolve. I considered going to the HOA board, but Carol was the president. Who would they believe? Me, the new guy, or their esteemed leader. I could imagine her spinning it, painting me as difficult, uncooperative, perhaps even mentally unstable from grief. No, a direct confrontation through official channels, with her holding all the cards, felt like a losing battle. I needed a different approach. My engineering mind started to analyze the system. Not just the electrical system, but the system of her arrogance. During this period of observation, I also started to connect with a few other residents. One, in particular, was Arthur Henderson, a retiree who had lived in Willow Creek for over 20 years. Arthur was a kindly, observant man, often found tending the small rose garden he was permitted near his patio. I struck up a conversation with him one afternoon, ostensibly about his roses. Eventually, I carefully steered the topic to the HOA, and then, even more carefully, to Carol Evans. Arthur's friendly expression clouded over slightly. "Ah, Carol," he said, sighing. "She's dedicated, I suppose. But sometimes her dedication feels more like a dictatorship. Been president for 5 years now. Things have certainly become more rigid. Has she always been so assertive with the rules?" I asked. Arthur chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Assertive when they suit her, flexible when they don't. There have been a few, shall we say, disagreements over the years, mostly about her interpretation of bylaws. She doesn't take kindly to being challenged." He paused, then looked at me shrewdly. "Having a bit of trouble, are you, Mark?" I hesitated, then decided to confide in him, at least partially. "She's been using my garage electricity to charge her car without permission. I've asked her to stop, but she continues." Arthur nodded slowly, not seeming surprised. "That sounds like Carol. Entitled. Thinks that Tesla gives her special privileges. It's a beautiful car, I'll grant you, but it doesn't run on air, does it?" He looked thoughtful. "Be careful, Mark. She can be vindictive. Try to get poor Mrs. Gable fined for the wrong shade of beige on her curtains last year. Curtains you could barely see from the street." His warning resonated. This wasn't just about stolen electricity. It was about power dynamics. Carol felt untouchable. Arthur, while sympathetic, wasn't in a position to actively help beyond moral support and information. He did, however, mention a former board treasurer, a man named David Miller, who had resigned a couple of years back after a significant disagreement with Carol over budget allocations. "David lives over in the Oakwood building," Arthur said. "Might be worth a chat. He knows where Carol's financial skeletons are buried, if there are any related to this sort of thing." I decided against directly involving David Miller for now. My problem was specific, and while financial misdeeds might be Carol's wider pattern, my evidence was about the electricity. I needed a solution that was equally specific and discreet. The thought of a direct, messy confrontation, even with more allies, was unappealing. It would descend into a he said, she said battle, and Carol was a master of that game. Instead, my mind kept returning to the electrical system itself. An engineer solves problems by understanding and manipulating systems. Her Tesla was a sophisticated piece of electronics. Its charging system was designed to protect itself from minor fluctuations. But what about a major one? A sudden, sharp, unexpected surge, specifically localized to the outlet she was abusing. The idea began to take shape, not as an act of petty vandalism, but as an engineered consequence. If someone creates an unsafe condition by improperly tapping into a power source, sometimes that unsafe condition has unfortunate results for the equipment connected. My garage circuit was mine. I was responsible for its safety and for the safety of devices I legitimately connected to it. Her unauthorized connection was a vulnerability she herself introduced. Carol, meanwhile, seemed to grow bolder. Perhaps my lack of further direct complaint was misinterpreted as acquiescence. One afternoon, I saw her struggling with the original orange extension cord. It was a standard duty one, probably getting warm from the continuous high current draw of the Tesla. The next day, it was replaced by a much thicker, heavy-duty black cord. She was upgrading her theft equipment. This escalation, this doubling down on her entitlement, solidified my resolve. She was practically daring me to do something. I spent several evenings in my workshop, not on woodworking, but on schematic diagrams and component research. I wasn't designing a bomb. I was thinking about controlled electrical overload. My sub-meter panel in the garage gave me a point of control. The external outlet was on its own breaker. What if that breaker, or the wiring leading to it, experienced a catastrophic but contained failure precisely when a heavy, unauthorized load was applied? The legalities were a gray area, and I knew it. But the key, I reasoned, was plausible deniability. I wouldn't be directly tampering with her car. I would be performing a stress test on my own, somewhat aged garage wiring. If her car just happened to be illicitly connected at that exact moment, well, that would be an unfortunate coincidence, wouldn't it? The kind of thing that happens when you plug expensive electronics into unverified, potentially faulty power sources you have no right to use. The risk was there. If it could be proven I did it deliberately to damage her car, I could be in serious trouble. But proving it would be hard, especially if I was careful. My main concern was ensuring no risk of fire or damage to anything other than the device illicitly drawing power. Precision was paramount. Sarah had always admired my precision. You think like a surgeon with circuits, /M, she used to say. That thought brought a sad smile to my face and a renewed determination. This wasn't just about stopping a thief. It was about exercising my skills, reclaiming my space, and a small, private act of standing up to a bully. It felt like something Sarah, in her own quietly strong way, would have approved of, albeit perhaps with a raised eyebrow at my methods. The plan began to solidify. It wasn't about a crude short circuit. It was about creating a specific type of electrical surge, a high-voltage transient, something that modern electronics, particularly sensitive charging systems, are vulnerable to if the surge is powerful enough and bypasses or overwhelms their built-in protections. I recalled some old industrial equipment I had in storage from my consulting days. A high-potential, high-pot tester designed to test insulation strength by applying high voltages. It was bulky, but it could deliver a very controlled, very brief, very potent jolt. If I could rig it to discharge into that specific outlet circuit under the guise of testing my own wiring integrity after noticing instability. The stakes were definitely rising. Carol had made a formal complaint to the HOA, not about the power, of course, but about the unsightly clutter of my recycling bin being left out an hour too long. It was petty, a clear attempt at intimidation, a flexing of her HOA muscle. I received a polite but firm warning letter. It only strengthened my resolve. She was poking the bear, unaware the bear had a PhD in electrical engineering and a very specific set of tools. I started gathering the components I would need. The high-pot tester was the main piece. I also needed some heavy gauge cables and a way to remotely trigger safely from inside my garage. My plan was to connect the tester to the circuit supplying the external outlet, but before the outlet itself, effectively making the outlet the discharge point. I would set it for a voltage high enough to fry a sensitive electronic component, but brief enough not to trip a main breaker or cause a sustained arc. It was a delicate balance. The why was critical for plausible deniability. I would document concerns about voltage irregularities on that circuit in my personal log. I would even send a polite, non-accusatory email to the HOA, CCNG myself, of course, mentioning that I was experiencing some electrical issues with my garage subpanel and would be conducting some diagnostic tests on my wiring in the coming days, advising that sensitive equipment should not be connected to my external outlets as a precaution. This email would be my alibi, my "I told you so, Carol." I was certain would either ignore it or see it as an empty threat from the petty new neighbor. Her arrogance was a key component of my plan. I spent a weekend carefully preparing. I double-checked the wiring in my garage. I calibrated the high-pot tester. I set up a system where I could monitor the external outlet from my workbench using the security camera feed. I needed to be sure she was plugged in, and only she was plugged in. I also prepared a story. I was testing the integrity of the aging wiring to ensure it was safe for my own power tools, given the flickering lights I'd, fictionally, experienced. If her car was damaged while improperly connected to a circuit undergoing legitimate, documented testing after a warning, well, that was her problem. The hardest part was the waiting. I sent my email to the HOA on a Monday morning. Dear HOA Management, I am writing to inform you that I've been noticing some intermittent power fluctuations on the garage subcircuit that services my external outlet, number 12B. As a safety precaution, I will be conducting some diagnostic tests on this circuit over the next few days. I advise residents to avoid using this specific outlet during this period, as there may be momentary interruptions or instability. Thank you, Mark Henderson, Unit 12B. I use my middle name intentionally, just a small bit of obfuscation. Carol, as predicted, did not respond, nor did she cease her nightly ritual. The orange, no, now black, heavy-duty cord continued to appear. Tuesday passed. Wednesday. Each evening, I watched her plug in, my heart rate quickening a little. I had to choose my moment perfectly. It needed to be when she was unlikely to be near the car, ideally after she'd plugged it in and gone inside for the night. On Wednesday evening, my camera feed showed her connecting the Tesla around 7 p.m. She gave the plug a little jiggle, then turned and walked briskly back to her unit. Lights came on in her living room. Perfect. My workshop was quiet, the only sound the low hum of my computer. On the screen, the Tesla sat, silently drinking my electricity. Not for much longer, /M, I thought. My setup was ready. The HOA tester was connected, grounded carefully. The discharge would be routed directly to the hot and neutral lines of that specific outlet. I had a heavy-duty, insulated switch I'd rigged as a trigger. I took a deep breath. And this is for all the times people like her think they can just take what they want, /M, I mused. It was for the principal. For Sarah, who hated bullies. For my peace and quiet. My hand hovered over the trigger switch. I watched the camera feed intently. No movement outside. Just the Tesla, leaching. Oing, okay, Mark. Precision, oing. I flipped the switch. There was no dramatic explosion, no shower of sparks visible from the outside. Just a dull, internal thunk from the HOA tester as its capacitors discharged their stored energy into the circuit. On my camera feed, for a fraction of a second, the charging indicator light on the Tesla seemed to flicker wildly. Then it went dark. Completely dark. I immediately cut the power to the HOA tester and began to carefully disconnect my setup, meticulously removing any trace that it had ever been there. My movements were calm, practiced. Years of working with high-voltage equipment had taught me caution and respect for electricity. Within 10 minutes, the tester was back in its storage case, and the wiring to the outlet was ostensibly normal. Except, I suspected, for any sensitive electronics that had been on the receiving end of that targeted jolt. I sat at my workbench, watching the camera feed. The Tesla remained inert. No charging light. Nothing. A slow smile spread across my face. It wasn't a triumphant, malicious grin, more a quiet satisfaction. The kind you get when a complex equation finally balances or a difficult piece of machinery clicks perfectly into place. I made a log entry. Wednesday, approximate 7:15 p.m. Conducted high-pot test on garage outlet circuit 12B due to persistent voltage instability. Test cycle completed. Circuit appears stable now, though further monitoring required. Then I made myself a cup of tea and waited for the morning. The dawn broke clear and cool. I was already up, sipping coffee by my window, which gave me a partial view of Carol's parking spot. Around 8:30 a.m., Carol emerged, dressed for work, carrying her briefcase. She approached the Tesla, unplugged the heavy black cord from the car, and then attempted to unplug it from my outlet. I saw her frown. She jiggled the car's charging port door, tried to open it again, then peered at the dashboard through the window. Her movements became more agitated. She pulled out her phone, probably trying to activate something remotely. Nothing. She tried the door handle. It seemed to open, but when she got in, I could imagine the blank screens, the dead silence that would greet her. A few minutes later, she was out of the car, phone pressed to her ear, her voice growing louder, more shrill. I couldn't hear the words, but her body language screamed frustration and disbelief. She gesticulated wildly towards her car, then towards my garage. This went on for a good 15 minutes. Finally, a tow truck from a Tesla certified service center arrived. The process of getting the completely dead Tesla onto the flatbed was an undignified struggle, much to Carol's visible fury. Later that day, I received an email. It was from Carol, CCNG, the entire HOA board, and the management company. Subject: Urgent. Vandalism and destruction of property. Unit 12B. The email was a masterpiece of righteous indignation and thinly veiled accusations. My vehicle, a Tesla Model S, has suffered catastrophic electrical failure due to being connected to the external power outlet of Unit 12B, occupied by Mark, middle name, last name. This occurred last night. I have reason to believe this was a deliberate act of sabotage by Mr. last name, as retaliation for a minor misunderstanding regarding power usage. The initial repair estimate is in the thousands, possibly requiring a full battery replacement. This is an outrage. I demand an immediate investigation and full restitution from Mr. last name for the damage to my property. His reckless testing, of which he vaguely informed the HOA, is clearly responsible. My heart beat a little faster reading it, but I remained outwardly calm. I had my documented email warning. I had my logbook. And crucially, she had just admitted in writing to the entire board that her car was connected to my outlet. Her own words were her undoing. I replied to all, keeping my tone measured and concerned. Subject: Urgent. Vandalism and destruction of property. Unit 12B. Dear Carol, board members, and management. I am very sorry to hear about the trouble with your vehicle, Carol. As I proactively notified the HOA and management on Monday, see attached email dated date, I was indeed conducting necessary diagnostic tests on my garage's private electrical circuit due to concerning power irregularities I had been observing. These tests were performed on my own property, on my own circuit. I specifically advised that the outlet should not be used by others during this period due to potential instability. I was not aware that your vehicle or any unauthorized device was connected to my outlet at the time of the diagnostic. Had I known, I would have, of course, ensured it was disconnected before proceeding with tests designed to ensure the safety and integrity of my own wiring. Perhaps the issue with your car is related to its connection to a circuit that was under active, pre-announced diagnostic testing. I certainly hope the damage is not as severe as you fear. I have records of my testing procedures and the prior instability notifications if the board requires them for their investigation. Sincerely, Mark, middle name, last name, Unit 12B. The HOA board convened an emergency meeting. I was invited, as was Carol. She arrived looking like thunder, armed with a thick printout from the Tesla Service Center. Mr. Harrison, a mild-mannered accountant who served as the board's treasurer since David Miller's departure, chaired the meeting. Ms. Evans, Mr. last name, thank you for attending. We need to understand what happened. Carol launched into a tirade, accusing me of deliberately frying her car. He knew it was plugged in. He's been complaining about it for weeks. This was malicious. When it was my turn, I calmly presented my timeline. My initial request for her to stop her continued usage, which I didn't explicitly state but heavily implied she knew was unauthorized, my email warning about the testing, and my logbook. My tests were on my own circuit, within my property line, I explained. I took precautions for my own equipment. If Ms. Evans's car was connected to my outlet without my knowledge or permission, especially after a public warning not to use that outlet, then any damage incurred is, regrettably, a consequence of that unauthorized connection to a circuit undergoing legitimate maintenance. Another board member, a lawyer named Ms. Albright, peered at Carol over her glasses. Carol, did you have Mr. last name S explicit permission to use his outlet last night or on any of the previous occasions? Carol sputtered. Well, no, not explicit permission, but it's a community. He was being difficult, and my garage charger is faulty. So you were, in effect, drawing power from his private metered line without consent. Ms. Albright pressed. And you continued to do so even after he sent out a general warning about testing that specific circuit? Carol's face was turning a shade of red that clashed with her expensive blouse. He did on purpose. He targeted my car. Do you have any proof of that, Carol? Ms. Albright asked gently. Any proof that he knew your car was specifically plugged in at that exact moment, or that his testing procedures were somehow fraudulent or designed to cause damage rather than diagnose a fault on his own property. Carol was silent. Her case, built on bluster and accusation, was crumbling against my calm, documented logic. The fact that she herself had admitted her car was plugged and was the nail in her coffin. The Tesla service report was indeed grim. Catastrophic failure of onboard charger and battery management system, likely due to significant overvoltage event on charging line. Replacement of charging unit and main battery pack recommended. Estimated cost, $22,500. A collective gasp went around the room. $22,500. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. Given the evidence presented, specifically Mr. last name as prior notification and Ms. Evans's admission of connecting to the outlet without permission, the board cannot find Mr. last name liable for the damages to Ms. Evans's vehicle. It appears to be an unfortunate consequence of an unauthorized connection during necessary electrical maintenance. Carol looked utterly defeated. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a sort of dazed horror as the financial reality sunk in. Her reign of petty tyranny, fueled by arrogance and a shiny red Tesla, had hit a very expensive, very solid wall. The aftermath was swift and satisfyingly quiet, for me at least. Carol Evans did not, as far as I knew, get her Tesla repaired. The cost was clearly prohibitive. For a few weeks, the magnificent red car sat in her parking spot, a monument to her folly, covered in a fine layer of dust. Then, one day, it was gone, towed away not by a Tesla service truck, but by a more generic vehicle, likely heading to a salvage auction or a specialist willing to take on the massive repair for parts. Shortly thereafter, a far more modest, used gasoline-powered sedan appeared in its place. Carol herself seemed diminished. Her imperious air was gone, replaced by a kind of weary resentment. She avoided eye contact with me, and I heard whispers that she was considering selling her unit. The financial blow of losing the Tesla, coupled with the public humiliation in front of the board she once dominated, had clearly taken its toll. The HOA board, prompted by Ms. Albright and Mr. Harrison, initiated a review of the bylaws regarding the use of common and private electrical outlets. New, clearer rules were drafted and circulated, explicitly forbidding the charging of electric vehicles from outlets not specifically designated and metered for that purpose without the express written consent of the property owner and the HOA. They even installed a couple of dedicated EV charging stations in the visitor parking area, a pay-per-use system, which seemed a much fairer solution for everyone. My life in Willow Creek returned to the quiet I had originally sought. My garage outlet remained mine, untouched. My electricity bills normalized. Arthur Henderson gave me a knowing wink one day as I passed his rose garden. Heard things out a bit. Energetic over the Evans situation, he said, a twinkle in his eye. Just some routine maintenance, Arthur, I replied with a smile. Made sure my circuits were all in order. He chuckled. Good to have skilled folks in the neighborhood. Keeps things properly grounded. I found a new sense of peace, but also a quiet sense of vindication. It wasn't just about the stolen electricity or the money. It was about standing up to someone who believed her desires trumped everyone else's rights and property. It was about using my knowledge, the skills I'd honed over a lifetime, not for aggression, but for a very precise, very targeted course correction. Sarah would have been amused, I think. She always said that even in retirement, my engineering brain would find problems to solve. She just probably never imagined one of them would be an HOA president with an overdeveloped sense of entitlement and an underdeveloped respect for other people's power outlets. Sometimes, when you're pushed too far, you find out you have resources you'd almost forgotten. And sometimes, just sometimes, helping an arrogant bully experience the direct consequences of their actions is the most satisfying outcome of all. Justice, in this case, wasn't blind. It was delivered via a carefully calibrated electrical pulse. So, that's my story of the HOA Karen and her dearly departed Tesla battery. What do you think? Was it justified, or did I go too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. It just goes to show, doesn't it, that you should never underestimate the quiet ones, especially if they know a thing or two about wattage and wiring. And remember, folks, always respect the power outlet. You never know what it might be connected to. Thanks for listening, and I hope this tale brought a little bit of that satisfying justice served feeling to your day. Maybe it'll even inspire you to stand up to your own neighborhood tyrants, though perhaps with slightly less electrifying methods.